Captain Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching Earth shrink to a pale blue dot in the distance. The massive Zeltharian transport ship hummed around her, its alien architecture both beautiful and terrifying. Crystalline walls pulsed with soft bioluminescent light, and the air carried a faint smell of ozone mixed with something floral she couldn't identify. "Beautiful vessel, is it not?" The voice behind her belonged to Administrator Kethvar, one of the Zeltharians who had orchestrated what they called the Great Kindness. His tall, elongated form moved with fluid grace, 4 arms gesturing expressively, while his large, dark eyes reflected genuine warmth. "Your people will find great comfort in our world. No more war, no more hunger, no more suffering." Sarah turned slowly, her military bearing unchanged, despite the civilian clothes they had given her. "You call it kindness. We call it something else." Kethvar tilted his head, a gesture she had learned indicated confusion among his species. "Your language confuses us sometimes. What word would you use?" "Slavery," Sarah said quietly. "We would call it slavery." The alien's expression shifted to what she recognized as their version of sadness. His elongated features drooped slightly, and the bioluminescent patches along his neck dimmed. "You wound us with such words, Captain Chen. We have saved your species from itself. The wars were endless. The destruction was heartbreaking to witness." Sarah had heard this speech countless times during the 3 months since the Zeltharian fleet had appeared in Earth's skies. They had not come with weapons blazing or demands for surrender. Instead, they had broadcast messages of concern and compassion. They spoke of Earth's environmental collapse, the ongoing conflicts, the suffering of billions. They offered salvation. The salvation came with conditions, of course. Humanity would be relocated to designated worlds where they could live in peace under Zeltharian guidance. No more weapons of mass destruction, no more industrial pollution, no more war. The aliens presented it as the ultimate act of mercy, saving a young species from its own destructive impulses. Most governments had agreed. Faced with superior technology and what appeared to be genuine benevolence, resistance had seemed both futile and ungrateful. Only small groups of military personnel and intelligence operatives had questioned the true cost of this cosmic charity. Sarah was one of them. "Tell me, Administrator," she said, moving away from the window to face him fully. "In your society, do individuals choose their own paths? Their careers, their homes, their companions?" "Of course," Kethvar replied, though his tone suggested he found the question strange. "Freedom of choice is sacred among our people. Then why do humans not have that freedom under your care?" The alien's 4 hands moved in complex patterns that Sarah had learned indicated deep thought. "Young species require guidance. You are brilliant, certainly. Your art, your music, your capacity for love and loyalty amazes us. But you are also dangerous to yourselves and potentially to others. We have seen this pattern before with developing civilizations." "How many others?" 17 different species over the past millennium, all now thriving under our protection. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. "All still under your protection?" "Naturally. Once a species is welcomed into the Zeltharian collective, they remain part of our family forever. We would never abandon those we have sworn to protect." The word forever echoed in Sarah's mind like a death knell. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her jaw clench. Around them, other humans moved through the ship's corridors, most appearing grateful and relieved. They had been selected from Earth's population based on genetic diversity, skills, and psychological profiles. The best and brightest of humanity, chosen to establish new colonies under alien supervision. They didn't know they were not colonists, but specimens. Beautiful, well-cared-for specimens in the galaxy's most elaborate zoo. "I should like to visit the ship's communication center," Sarah said carefully. "I'm hoping to record messages for the humans still on Earth, to let them know how well we're being treated." Kethvar's expression brightened, literally. The bioluminescent patches along his neck pulsed with pleased colors. "What thoughtfulness? Yes, of course. Your words of comfort will ease the transition for those who follow. Come." As they walked through the ship's corridors, Sarah observed everything with the trained eye of a military intelligence officer. Guard positions, though the Zeltharians didn't think of them as guards. Security checkpoints, disguised as helpful information stations. Restricted areas, marked with symbols she was slowly learning to read. The communication center was a marvel of biotechnology, with living computers that responded to touch and thought. Kethvar showed her how to use the systems with obvious pride in their technology. What he didn't realize was that Sarah's background in electronic warfare had taught her to recognize communication protocols in any system, biological or digital. "I'll need privacy for these personal messages," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll return in 1 standard hour." Alone in the communication center, Sarah's facade dropped. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency over the alien interfaces. Her enhanced memory mapping every command pathway Kethvar had shown her. The Zeltharians were incredibly advanced, but they had a fatal flaw. They genuinely believed their own propaganda about kindness and protection. They didn't think like soldiers because they had forgotten what it meant to fight for freedom. Sarah began her work. First, she activated what appeared to be a standard message recorder, speaking words of comfort and reassurance that would satisfy any Zeltharian monitoring. Then, using techniques learned from years of covert operations, she began accessing deeper systems. The Zeltharian communication network was vast, connecting not just this ship, but their entire collective across multiple star systems. Sarah found references to the 17 protected species, each assigned to specific worlds, their populations managed and controlled. She found reports on human psychological adaptation, breeding recommendations, and long-term integration plans. What she also found were the hidden communication channels. Every advanced civilization developed them eventually, unofficial networks used by those who questioned authority, who shared information that governments preferred to keep secret. The Zeltharians were no different. Buried within their compassionate collective was a small but growing movement of individuals who wondered if their kindness had become something darker. Sarah accessed these channels carefully, learning their protocols and identifying key figures. She discovered that not all Zeltharians agreed with the protection policies. Some younger members of their society questioned whether advanced species had the right to impose their will on others, even with good intentions. More importantly, she found evidence that other protected species had tried to resist. Their attempts had been met not with violence but with psychological reconditioning and tighter restrictions. The Zeltharians called it therapeutic intervention for aggressive tendencies. Sarah called it brainwashing. As her hour ran out, she carefully covered her tracks and prepared to leave. But first, she activated a hidden subroutine she had embedded in the ship's communication system. It would lie dormant for weeks, collecting information and transmitting it through the underground network she had identified. When Kethvar returned, he found her finishing what appeared to be an emotional message to her family. "The recordings went well?" he asked with genuine concern. "Very well. Thank you for your kindness," Sarah replied, meaning every word in ways he could never understand. Over the following days, as the ship traveled through hyperspace toward their new home, Sarah continued her intelligence gathering. She studied the ship's systems, memorized its layout, and identified other humans who might be willing to listen to uncomfortable truths. She found them among the military personnel, as expected, but also among scientists, engineers, and even some civilians who had begun to notice the subtle restrictions on their freedom. Dr. Michael Torres, a xenobiologist, had attempted to study Zeltharian biology and been politely but firmly redirected. Engineer Lisa Park had asked about human-controlled technology and been told it wasn't necessary for their well-being. Small restrictions, gentle redirections, all performed with such kindness that questioning them seemed churlish. Sarah began having quiet conversations with these individuals. Not direct recruitment, not yet. Just careful questions that encouraged them to think about their situation from different angles. "Have you noticed," she said to Dr. Torres one day, as they shared a meal in the ship's dining area, "that we haven't met any of the other protected species? 17 different civilizations under Zeltharian care, but were kept completely separate." Torres paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. The Zeltharians had provided foods as close to human preferences as possible. Another kindness. "I hadn't thought about it, but you're right. I asked to compare human and Zeltharian biology with other species, and Administrator Kethvar said it wasn't appropriate at this stage of our integration." "Not appropriate," Sarah repeated quietly, "or not allowed." The seed was planted. Over the following days, Torres began asking more questions, noticing more restrictions. He shared his observations with colleagues, who began their own quiet investigations. Meanwhile, Sarah's hidden subroutines were bearing fruit. The underground Zeltharian networks were more extensive than she had hoped, reaching into their military, scientific, and administrative branches. Through carefully crafted messages that appeared to be routine data transfers, she made contact with sympathetic individuals. One of them was scientist Veltar, a young Zeltharian who specialized in interspecies psychology. Through encrypted exchanges, Sarah learned that Veltar had been studying the long-term effects of protection policies on other species. The results were disturbing. Protected species showed declining innovation rates over generations. Their art became less original, their science less adventurous, their social structures more rigid. They became content but stagnant, losing the very qualities that had made them worthy of protection in the first place. Veltar had tried to present these findings to the collective's leadership. They had been dismissed as statistically insignificant variations. When Veltar pressed the issue, suggesting that protection policies might need revision, they had been reassigned to less sensitive research projects. The pattern was clear. The Zeltharian collective had convinced itself that its way was the only way. Any evidence to the contrary was ignored or explained away. They had become prisoners of their own benevolence, unable to see that their kindness had become tyranny. But Sarah also learned something else from her hidden communications. Humans were not the only species currently being saved. 2 other civilizations were undergoing similar relocations, their populations being moved to protected worlds for their own good. The Zeltharian expansion of kindness was accelerating. As their ship neared its destination, Sarah stood once again at the observation deck, but this time, she was not alone. Dr. Torres, Engineer Park, and a dozen other humans had joined her, along with several Zeltharian contacts who shared their concerns through hidden communication channels. The planet below was beautiful beyond description. Pristine oceans reflected twin suns, while continents covered in silver vegetation sparkled like jewels. Cities of living crystal dotted the landscape, their organic architecture blending seamlessly with the natural environment. "It's magnificent," whispered Dr. Torres. "It's a cage," Sarah replied quietly. "A beautiful, comfortable, eternal cage." Administrator Kethvar approached their group with his usual warmth and enthusiasm. "Welcome to Haven, my friends, your new home. We have prepared everything for your comfort and happiness." Sarah looked at the alien administrator, this being who genuinely believed he was performing acts of cosmic charity. She thought about the 17 other species living their controlled lives on similar worlds. She thought about Earth, now being prepared for its own protection through careful management of its remaining population. "Thank you, Administrator," she said with a smile that would have chilled him if he had understood its meaning. "I'm sure we'll make the most of our opportunities here." As the ship began its descent toward the surface, Sarah activated the final phase of her hidden communications network. Encoded signals began transmitting to every Zeltharian underground contact she had cultivated, carrying detailed intelligence about ship systems, security protocols, and population management procedures. The messages also carried something else: proof that humans were not the grateful, helpless refugees the collective believed them to be. They were a species that had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars through adaptation, innovation, and sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. The Zeltharians had mistaken humanity's capacity for gratitude as weakness. They would learn differently. Sarah Chen had spent her career studying asymmetric warfare, the art of defeating superior enemies through unconventional means. Now she faced the ultimate asymmetric challenge. How do you fight an enemy who genuinely believes they're helping you? The answer, she realized, was to help them understand the true meaning of human kindness. And if they couldn't understand it willingly, she would teach them through demonstration. As Haven's surface grew larger in the viewports, Sarah began planning humanity's first lesson in what they called vengeance, but what she preferred to think of as justice. The Zeltharians had taken human freedom and called it protection. They had stolen human choice and named it kindness. Soon they would learn what humans called such actions and what humans traditionally did about them. The ship touched down on Haven's crystal landing platforms with barely a tremor, its advanced technology making the massive vessel's arrival seem gentle as a feather. Around Sarah, humans pressed against the viewports to catch their first glimpse of their new world, many weeping with relief and gratitude. They didn't know yet that they were tears of farewell to everything their species had once been. But they would learn, and when they did, Sarah Chen would be ready to show them how to reclaim what the galaxy's most compassionate species had taken from them. The Great Kindness, as the Zeltharians called it, was about to meet the great reckoning that humans would deliver in return. Haven's morning brought two suns that painted the crystal cities in warm amber light, their rays filtering through the translucent buildings to create patterns of gold and silver on the streets below. Sarah stood on the balcony of her assigned dwelling, a beautiful structure that grew from the ground like a massive flower, its walls alive with soft bioluminescence. Every comfort had been provided. Fresh water flowed from walls that responded to touch. Food appeared when requested, tailored to human nutritional needs and taste preferences. Climate control maintained perfect temperature and humidity. It was the most luxurious prison cell ever constructed. 3 months had passed since their arrival, and Sarah had used every day to build her network. The humans were scattered across several communities, each designed to feel like home while maintaining subtle barriers that prevented large gatherings or unrestricted movement. The Zeltharians called it gradual integration, allowing humans to adjust slowly to their new life. Sarah called it population management. She had established contact with resistance cells in each human settlement through a combination of face-to-face meetings and hidden digital communications. Dr. Torres had proven invaluable, using his scientific credentials to travel between communities while sharing biological data that contained encoded messages. Engineer Park had identified weaknesses in the surveillance systems, creating blind spots where humans could meet without Zeltharian monitoring. But their most important discovery had come from an unexpected source: the other protected species. During what appeared to be a routine cultural exchange program, Sarah had met Zaxhai, a representative of the Korthak people who had been under Zeltharian protection for over 2 centuries. The meeting was carefully supervised, designed to show humans how well other species thrived under collective care. HFY played his part perfectly, speaking warmly of Zeltharian kindness and the peace his people enjoyed. But during a moment when their supervisors were distracted by a question from another human, he had passed Sarah a small crystal that appeared to be a simple cultural artifact. The crystal contained a message that chilled her to the bone. The Korthak had once been a warrior culture, proud and independent. Under Zeltharian protection, they had been gradually pacified, their aggressive tendencies redirected into approved artistic and athletic pursuits. Their population was carefully controlled, their genetics monitored and guided. Those who showed signs of their ancestral warrior nature were given therapeutic treatment to help them find peace. The message also contained coordinates and communication frequencies for other protected species who had maintained secret networks. 17 different civilizations, all seemingly content under Zeltharian care, all hiding the same desperate desire for freedom. Sarah had wasted no time in making contact. What she discovered transformed her understanding of the challenge they faced. The Zeltharian protection system wasn't just about controlling individual species. It was about creating a galaxy-wide empire of dependence, with the collective as benevolent rulers over a vast population of willing subjects. Each protected species contributed something valuable: advanced mathematics, artistic genius, technological innovation, biological insights. The Zeltharians harvested the best of each civilization while carefully managing their development to prevent them from ever becoming threats or competitors. It was slavery disguised as salvation, carried out with such genuine belief in its righteousness that even many Zeltharians didn't recognize it as oppression. But Sarah had also learned something else. The collective was not as unified as it appeared. Through her communications with scientist Veltar and other Zeltharian dissidents, she discovered that their society faced growing internal tensions. Younger generations questioned the morality of protecting species against their will. Some scientists worried about the long-term stagnation they observed in protected populations. A few military commanders argued that true strength came from facing challenges, not from avoiding them. The dissidents were small in number but held key positions throughout Zeltharian society. More importantly, they had access to information and resources that no single protected species could obtain alone. Sarah began planning what she privately called Operation Prometheus, not just an escape from protection, but a systematic dismantling of the entire collective system. Her first target was the communication networks. Working with Engineer Park and sympathetic Zeltharians, Sarah's team began mapping the collective's information infrastructure. They discovered that despite their biological technology, the Zeltharians still relied on quantum entanglement communication for instantaneous contact across vast distances. More importantly, these networks carried detailed records of every protected species, their locations, population data, and integration status. If they could access those records, they could contact every resistance group simultaneously. The plan required precise coordination between human technical skills and Zeltharian system access. Veltar provided authentication codes and network protocols. Park developed interface hardware that could interact with biological systems. Dr. Torres created medical nanomachines that could carry data through living computer networks without being detected. But they needed a distraction, something significant enough to occupy Zeltharian attention while they worked. Sarah found her answer in Haven's monthly cultural celebration, an event designed to help humans maintain their heritage while integrating into collective society. This month's theme was human military history, approved because the Zeltharians viewed it as a harmless reminder of humanity's violent past, now safely in the past. What they didn't realize was that Sarah had convinced them to allow demonstrations of human tactical thinking and strategic planning, presented as academic exercises in historical analysis. On the night of the celebration, humans from all settlements gathered in Haven's central amphitheater, a massive crystal structure that could accommodate thousands. Zeltharian administrators watched with benevolent smiles as humans presented displays of their military heritage. Ancient Roman formations, medieval night tactics, Napoleonic strategies, and modern special operations procedures. The presentations were engaging and educational, exactly what the Zeltharians expected from their grateful human charges. What they didn't notice was that each demonstration contained coded information about current resistance activities, distributed to every human present through carefully choreographed movements and signals. While the celebrations continued above ground, Sarah led a small team through Haven's service tunnels toward the primary communication hub. The tunnels were biological structures, living passages that responded to authorized genetic signatures. Veltar had provided tissue samples that allowed them to move freely through areas supposedly restricted to Zeltharians. The communication hub was a marvel of biotechnology, a vast chamber filled with what appeared to be enormous brain-like structures connected by flowing streams of luminescent fluid. The organic computers processed information at quantum speeds while maintaining perfect integration with the collective's consciousness networks. Park went to work immediately, connecting her modified interface hardware to the primary data streams. The biological systems accepted her connections without alarm, recognizing the Zeltharian genetic markers Veltar had provided. Within minutes, she had access to records that spanned centuries of collective activity. What they found exceeded their worst fears. The Protected Species Program was just the beginning. The Zeltharians had long-term plans for every intelligent species in their galaxy, a systematic program of elevation that would eventually bring all civilizations under their benevolent control. Earth was already being prepared for full integration, its governments cooperating with collective advisors who were gradually assuming more authority over human affairs. But the records also revealed something else: locations and status reports for resistance movements among all protected species. The Korthak weren't alone. Every single civilization under Zeltharian care had maintained some form of underground opposition, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim their freedom. Sarah made a command decision that would either liberate 17 species or condemn them all to tighter control. She activated every hidden communication channel simultaneously, sending out a message that would reach every resistance cell in the galaxy. The message was simple: Prometheus has stolen fire. The children are ready to come home. Across dozens of worlds, resistance leaders received coordinates for secure communication networks and detailed intelligence about collective operations. For the first time in centuries, the protected species could coordinate their activities on a galactic scale. But Sarah's actions had consequences she hadn't anticipated. The massive data transfers triggered security protocols throughout the collective's networks. Alarms began sounding in the communication hub as biological systems detected unauthorized access patterns. Emergency containment fields activated, trapping Sarah's team in the facility while automated security responses began flooding the area with paralytic agents. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they override our genetic keys," Park shouted over the growing alarm sounds. "The systems are learning our access patterns." Sarah accessed her emergency communications, sending a final message to human settlements across Haven. "Phase 2 is now active. Remember your training." Throughout the planet, humans received her signal and began implementing contingency plans they had rehearsed as emergency procedures for natural disasters. In reality, they were military tactics adapted for insurgent operations against a technologically superior enemy. Dr. Torres led teams of scientists in creating biological agents that would interfere with Zeltharian sensory organs, not to cause permanent harm, but to create confusion and distraction. The compounds were based on human pheromones and biochemical markers that the Zeltharian protection protocols were designed to preserve, making them invisible to security scanners. Engineer Park's disciples activated hidden modifications they had made to the settlement's infrastructure over the past months. Power grids fluctuated in carefully planned patterns. Transportation systems experienced mysterious malfunctions. Communication networks developed routing problems that made it difficult for administrators to coordinate their response. But most importantly, humans began revealing skills and knowledge that the Zeltharians had never suspected they possessed. The collective had studied humanity's recorded history and technological development, but they had never truly understood human military doctrine. They knew humans had been warriors, but they viewed it as a primitive phase that their protection had successfully transcended. They didn't realize that combat skills, tactical thinking, and strategic planning were integral parts of human psychology, not just unfortunate evolutionary leftovers. Captain Sarah Chen had been a special operations officer, but she was not unique. Every human settlement contained former military personnel, intelligence operatives, law enforcement officers, and civilians with survival skills honed by generations of conflict. The Zeltharians had unknowingly gathered together some of the most dangerous human beings on Earth, thinking they were collecting representatives of humanity's better nature. They were about to learn that humanity's capacity for protective violence was part of their better nature. As security forces converged on the communication hub, Sarah's team put their escape plan into action. The facility's biological systems were designed to contain intruders, but they had never been tested against humans who understood both electronic warfare and biological manipulation. Park's interface hardware released a flood of corrupted data into the facility's control systems, causing the living computers to experience something resembling seizures. Dr. Torres deployed his biological agents, filling the air with compounds that interfered with Zeltharian sensory organs while remaining harmless to humans. But it was Sarah who provided the final touch to their escape. Using techniques learned from studying alien psychology profiles, she activated the facility's emergency protocols by convincing the biological computers that humans were experiencing a medical crisis and required immediate evacuation. The containment fields deactivated as the systems prioritized human welfare over security concerns. Emergency passages opened, providing direct routes to the surface. Even as security forces surrounded the facility, Sarah's team escaped through exits that the computers had created specifically to ensure their safety. By the time Zeltharian forces reached the communication hub, they found only damaged equipment and traces of human presence. But the real damage had already been done. Across the galaxy, resistance movements that had operated in isolation for centuries were now connected, coordinated, and armed with detailed intelligence about collective operations. The Zeltharians had spent so much effort protecting humans from external threats that they had never considered the possibility that humans might become a threat to them. As Sarah's team regrouped at a hidden location in Haven's crystal forests, emergency communications flooded their networks with reports from resistance cells on dozens of worlds. The Prometheus protocol was spreading faster than the collective could respond, with each species contributing their unique capabilities to a growing coordinated rebellion. The Korthak offered their warrior skills and knowledge of collective military procedures. The Vextai contributed advanced mathematics and encryption technologies. The Mordok shared biological weapons that could disable Zeltharian technology without causing permanent harm. Every protected species had spent their captivity learning their captors' weaknesses, but the collective was not defenseless. As reports of coordinated resistance activities reached their leadership, emergency sessions began throughout their government. Military commanders, who had spent centuries in peaceful administrative roles, suddenly found themselves planning responses to threats they had never imagined facing. The debate was immediate and intense. Some Zeltharian leaders argued for military intervention, crushing the rebellions before they could spread further. Others advocated for increased therapeutic interventions, helping the protected species overcome their aggressive tendencies through psychological treatment. But a growing faction, led by officials like Veltar and his allies, proposed something different, actually listening to what the protected species were trying to tell them. As Haven's twin suns sat behind the crystal spires of the capital city, Sarah Chen stood in a hidden cave network that her team had discovered beneath the planet's surface. Ancient formations of natural crystal provided both shelter and communication enhancement, allowing her to maintain contact with resistance cells across the galaxy. The reports coming in painted a picture of controlled chaos. Every protected world was experiencing simultaneous uprisings, but they were not random acts of violence. The resistance movements were following coordinated plans that minimized casualties while maximizing disruption to collective control systems. It was, Sarah realized, the largest coordinated military operation in galactic history, and it was being executed by species that the Zeltharians had assumed were pacified and grateful for their protection. The irony was not lost on her. The collective had created the very problem they had sought to prevent. By gathering the best and brightest from every species under their protection, they had unknowingly assembled the most capable resistance force imaginable. As she prepared her next communication to the resistance network, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. The Zeltharians genuinely believed they were performing acts of kindness. Their protection policies came from real compassion and a sincere desire to prevent suffering. But they had never understood that freedom was worth suffering for. They couldn't comprehend that dignity required the right to make your own mistakes, face your own challenges, and determine your own destiny. Now they were about to receive an education in those concepts from 17 different species who had never forgotten what it meant to be free. The next phase of Operation Prometheus was about to begin, and Sarah Chen intended to teach the galaxy's most compassionate species exactly what humans meant when they spoke of justice. The Zeltharian High Council convened in emergency session as reports flooded in from across their protected worlds. In the Council's ancient amphitheater, carved from a single massive crystal that had grown over millennia, 17 different species were simultaneously rejecting the salvation that had been freely given to them. Administrator Kethvar stood before the assembled leadership, his usual composure shattered by the scope of the coordinated uprising. The humans have somehow activated dormant resistance networks across all protected worlds. They possess capabilities we never detected during our observation periods. Council leader Thexeral, eldest among their kind, gestured with all four arms in patterns that indicated deep concern. How is this possible? Our psychological profiles indicated that humans were grateful for our intervention. Their representatives expressed genuine appreciation for our protection. They did express gratitude, Kethvar replied, his bioluminescent patches flickering with confusion. And I believe that gratitude was sincere. But we failed to understand that humans can feel multiple emotions simultaneously. They can be grateful for our intentions while rejecting our methods. In the council chamber's observation galleries, scientist Veltar watched the proceedings with growing anxiety. His secret communications with human resistance leaders had revealed the scope of their capabilities, and he feared what might happen if the council chose a military response. The protected species had spent centuries learning Zeltharian technology and tactics. Any conflict would be far more costly than his people could imagine. Below, Military Commander Kixmar was presenting tactical assessments that confirmed Veltar's fears. The resistance movements demonstrate sophisticated knowledge of our security protocols, communication networks, and population management systems. They are not acting emotionally, but following carefully planned strategic objectives. "What do they want?" asked Council Member Yathala. her voice carrying the harmonics that indicated she was accessing the collective's shared memory networks. What demands have they made? Kethvar activated a holographic display showing messages received from various protected worlds. They have been remarkably consistent. They want what they call freedom, the right to govern themselves, choose their own paths, and face their own challenges without our guidance. The council chamber erupted in confused conversations as the implications sank in. To the Zeltharian mind, the request was almost incomprehensible. Why would any species choose suffering when peace was available? Why select uncertainty when security was guaranteed? But as the debate continued, reports arrived that changed everything. On Haven, Sarah Chen had initiated what she called the demonstration phase of Operation Prometheus. Rather than engaging in destructive warfare, the human resistance was showcasing exactly what they were capable of accomplishing when working together. In the space of 6 days, human engineers had completely redesigned Haven's transportation systems, increasing efficiency by 30% while reducing environmental impact. Human scientists had solved 3 theoretical problems that had puzzled Zeltharian researchers for decades. Human artists had created cultural works that moved Zeltharian observers to tears with their beauty and emotional depth. Most remarkably, they had done all of this while maintaining their resistance activities, proving that rebellion and creation could coexist. Similar reports arrived from every protected world. The Korthak had developed new defensive technologies that could protect their settlements without harming attackers. The Vextai had created mathematical models that solved resource distribution problems affecting entire sectors of the galaxy. The Mordok had engineered biological solutions to environmental challenges that had seemed impossible. Each protected species was demonstrating that their greatest achievements came not from safety and comfort, but from the freedom to pursue their own visions of excellence. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The protected species were more creative, more innovative, and more productive when they operated outside the collective's guidance than they had ever been under protection. As the reports accumulated, a profound silence fell over the council chamber. For the first time in their history, the Zeltharians were confronting evidence that their most fundamental beliefs might be wrong. Veltar chose that moment to step forward from the observation gallery, his movement drawing attention throughout the chamber. "Council leader, I request permission to address the assembly." Thexeral's ancient eyes focused on the young scientist. "Scientist Veltar, your research into interspecies psychology has been noted by this council. What insights can you offer?" "Honored leader, I believe we have made a critical error in our understanding of what constitutes kindness." Veltar's voice carried clearly through the chamber's natural acoustics. "We have assumed that preventing struggle eliminates suffering, but the evidence suggests that the struggle itself has value we failed to recognize." He activated his own holographic displays, showing data collected over centuries of protection policies. Observe the innovation rates among protected species compared to their pre-protection periods. Note the decline in artistic originality, the reduction in scientific breakthroughs, the stagnation of social development. The data painted a devastating picture. Every protected species had experienced the same pattern: initial gratitude followed by gradual decline in their most distinctive qualities. They became safer, more comfortable, and fundamentally less than they had been before. "We have been committing what humans call kindness that kills," Veltar continued. "Our protection has preserved their bodies while slowly destroying their spirits. We have prevented their deaths while making their lives meaningless." Council member Yithala rose to respond, her bioluminescent patches flashing with indignation. "You suggest that we should abandon our sacred duty? Allow species to destroy themselves when we have the power to prevent it?" "I suggest," Veltar replied carefully, that we have misunderstood what our duty should be. Perhaps our role is not to protect species from all challenges, but to help them develop the wisdom and strength to face those challenges themselves. The debate that followed would later be recorded as the most significant in Zeltharian history. Ancient beliefs clashed with new evidence, traditional compassion confronted uncomfortable truths, and the very foundation of their civilization came under scrutiny. Meanwhile, on Haven and the other protected worlds, Sarah Chen was implementing the final phase of Operation Prometheus. Rather than waiting for the Zeltharians to make decisions about their future, the resistance movements were creating their own solutions. Using the communication networks they had established, representatives from all 17 protected species began drafting what they called the Freedom Charter, a document that outlined their vision for a new relationship with the collective. The charter was not a declaration of war or a demand for the collective's destruction. Instead, it was a proposal for transformation written by beings who had spent centuries studying Zeltharian society and understood their psychology better than the Zeltharians understood themselves. The document acknowledged the genuine compassion behind the protection policies. It recognized the collective's achievements in preventing interspecies conflicts and reducing suffering across the galaxy. But it also insisted that true kindness required recognizing the autonomy and dignity of those being helped. The charter proposed a new model, partnership rather than protection. The collective's advanced technology and accumulated wisdom would be shared freely with any species that requested assistance, but no civilization would be subject to involuntary guidance. Species would be free to make their own mistakes, face their own challenges, and find their own paths to greatness or failure. More importantly, the charter offered something the Zeltharians had never experienced, the opportunity to learn from the species they had protected. Each civilization under their care had developed unique insights during their centuries of hidden resistance. They offered to share these discoveries freely, creating a true exchange of knowledge and experience. As news of the charter spread through hidden communication networks, something unprecedented happened throughout the galaxy. Zeltharian citizens began joining the resistance movements, not as enemies but as allies who shared the same vision of voluntary cooperation rather than imposed protection. Veltar found himself serving as an unofficial ambassador between the species, helping to translate concepts and resolve misunderstandings that arose from fundamental differences in psychology and culture. He discovered that many younger Zeltharians had always felt uncomfortable with the protection policies but had lacked the courage or evidence to challenge them. The resistance movements gave them both. Within weeks, the unauthorized alliance between protected species and sympathetic Zeltharians had grown into a galaxy-spanning movement that no military force could realistically suppress. More importantly, the evidence of improved performance and innovation under freedom had become impossible to ignore. The breakthrough came when Council Leader Thexral made an unprecedented decision. Rather than ordering military intervention or therapeutic treatment, she chose to meet personally with the resistance leadership to understand their perspective directly. The meeting took place on a neutral space station, a massive structure of living crystal that had served as a diplomatic facility for interspecies negotiations. Sarah Chen found herself face-to-face with the being whose species had shaped the destiny of billions for centuries. Thexral was ancient even by Zeltharian standards, her elongated features bearing the marks of millennia of experience. Her bioluminescent patches, pulsed with colors Sarah had learned, indicated deep contemplation and uncertainty. "Captain Chen," Thexral began, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested both respect and confusion. "You have accomplished something we believed impossible. You have united species that had accepted our protection for centuries. Help me understand what we failed to see." Sarah chose her words carefully, knowing that this conversation might determine the future of 17 civilizations. "Council Leader, your people saved us from destruction. That kindness is real, and we honor it. But salvation that comes at the cost of freedom becomes a different form of destruction. But you suffered on your world, Thexerol replied. Wars, environmental collapse, social inequality, we ended all of that. Yes, you did. And in doing so, you also ended our ability to overcome those challenges ourselves. You prevented us from growing stronger through struggle, wiser through mistakes, and more unified through choosing cooperation over conflict. Sarah activated a holographic display showing data from the resistance activities. Look at what humans accomplished in just 3 months when we had a goal that truly mattered to us. Look at what every protected species achieved when they had the freedom to pursue their own vision of excellence. The evidence was undeniable. Freed from the comfortable restrictions of protection, each species had rediscovered capabilities they had forgotten they possessed. We never intended to cause harm, Thexerol said quietly. Our policies came from genuine desire to prevent suffering and death. We know, Sarah replied with genuine warmth. And that's why we're not here as enemies seeking destruction, but as students offering to share what we've learned. Your people have mastered the art of preventing suffering. We've mastered the art of creating meaning from struggle. Together we could accomplish things that neither of us could achieve alone. The negotiations that followed lasted for months, but the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence was too clear, the benefits too obvious, the moral arguments too compelling. One by one, protected worlds were granted autonomy under new agreements that provided assistance when requested, but never imposed guidance when it was unwanted. The transition was not without challenges. Some species struggled to readjust to making their own decisions after centuries of dependence. Others made mistakes that resulted in conflicts and setbacks, but they also achieved breakthroughs that surprised even their former protectors. The Korthak developed new forms of art that combined their warrior heritage with the peace they had learned under protection. The Vextai created technologies that surpassed anything the collective had imagined possible. The Mordok discovered forms of biological engineering that revolutionized medicine throughout the galaxy. And humanity? Humanity did what humans had always done when given the freedom to choose their own path. They reached for the stars with renewed purpose, no longer as refugees seeking protection, but as explorers ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of humanity's first independently designed starship, watching as Earth grew larger in the viewports. The planet was healing from the environmental damage that had originally brought Zeltharian attention, but the recovery was being accomplished by human hands using human innovations combined with freely shared collective knowledge. It was, she reflected, a perfect example of what the new partnership could accomplish. The Zeltharians had provided the tools and knowledge needed for planetary restoration, but humans had chosen how to use them, making mistakes and discoveries along the way. Behind her, Administrator Kethvar approached with the quiet grace that had once seemed so alien but now felt familiar. He had become one of the strongest advocates for the new partnership model, his understanding of human psychology having evolved dramatically through their months of cooperation. The Council has approved humanity's request for expanded exploration rights, he reported. You may establish colonies in any unoccupied systems you choose, with full autonomy over their development. Thank you, Sarah replied, meaning it deeply. And the collective's exploration programs? Proceeding as planned, but with new protocols. When we encounter species that might benefit from assistance, we will offer it freely, but respect their right to refuse. We will prevent destruction only when specifically requested to do so. Sarah nodded, watching Earth's blue oceans and green continents resolve into recognizable features. Your people are learning quickly. It takes courage to abandon old beliefs when they no longer serve their purpose. Humans taught us that, Kethvar replied. You showed us that true kindness sometimes requires allowing those you care about to face their own challenges. It was a difficult lesson, but a necessary one. As their ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Sarah thought about the strange journey that had brought them to this point. The Zeltharians had named their policies kindness because they genuinely believed that protection from all harm was the highest form of compassion. Humanity had called it vengeance because they understood that freedom stolen, even with good intentions, was still freedom lost. Both perspectives had contained elements of truth. The Zeltharians' compassion was real and valuable. Humanity's desire for autonomy was equally valid and necessary. But the real breakthrough had come when they discovered that kindness and freedom didn't have to be opposites. True kindness could include respecting others' right to choose their own paths. True freedom could include accepting help when it was offered without conditions. The galaxy was changing because 17 different species had refused to accept that safety and meaning were mutually exclusive. They had demonstrated that the greatest kindness was not protection from all challenges, but support in facing those challenges with dignity and autonomy. As Sarah's feet touched Earth's soil for the first time since her forced departure, she smiled at the irony of their situation. Humans had been taken from Earth as refugees and had returned as teachers. They had left as a protected species and came back as partners in the greatest cooperative venture in galactic history. The Zeltharians had indeed shown them kindness, though not in the way they had intended. By forcing humanity to fight for their freedom, they had reminded them of their own strength. By challenging them to prove their worth, they had helped them rediscover their greatness. And in return, humanity had shown the collective the greatest kindness of all. The truth that love without freedom is not love at all, and that the highest form of protection is teaching others to protect themselves. The great kindness, as the Zeltharians still called it, had become something neither species had expected. It had become the foundation for a new form of civilization, one based not on protection or dominance, but on voluntary cooperation between free and equal peoples. Looking up at the stars that beckoned to humanity once again, Sarah Chen knew that the real journey was just beginning. The galaxy was vast, full of species who had never heard of either kindness or vengeance as humans, and Zeltharians understood those concepts. They would meet some who needed protection and others who valued freedom above safety. They would encounter civilizations that thrived under guidance and others that grew strong through struggle. And they would face each situation with wisdom earned through their own journey from protection to partnership, ready to offer whatever form of kindness was truly needed.